All right, looks like we're back on. Stephen Follett and Randy Galvin for Long Range Studies. Uh, Back at you with another episode. Today, Randy wanted to talk about cartridge selection, a little bit about how to make that decision. And one of the most common questions is, hey, I've got a 308 or I've heard of 308. My buddies shoot 308. 308 ammo is cheap. Should I go 308 or should I go 6.5 Creedmoor? There's a lot of hype behind the 6.5 and a lot of animosity towards it. Drinking the Creedmoor Kool-Aid, those sorts of things. Sometimes I think it does get overstated what a 6.5 Creedmoor will do. But we can talk ballistically, and the 6.5 Creedmoor ballistically is better than a 308. I don't think there's any question once you run the math on that. But so much of what you run is going to be your application. And what do you want to do, and how do you want to shoot it? So that's what we wanted to do today. Randy suggested that, and so we're going to talk about the 6 Creedmoor, the 6.5 Creedmoor, and the 308. Specifically those three cartridges just because they're short action cartridges, fairly common understanding of what they are. And we took some information that one of our teammates, Casey Chudy, put together on through an applied ballistic weapons analysis program. And so that's what we've got to go. So, Randy, what are the thoughts in your head whenever a new shooter says, "Hey, should I go 308 or 6.5?"
I mean, honestly, yeah. First thing is what application you're going to do with it. I shoot PRS, so that's usually what my focus is. The next thing is going to be whether or not they reload and the availability of factory ammo. Obviously, you can get 308 pretty much anywhere. 6.5 Creedmoor has gotten to the point where you can get that just about anywhere, too. I actually, a couple weeks ago when I was up in Alabama, stopped at a gas station that had 6.5 Creedmoor ammo. It's hilarious.
That's awesome. Well, I know I've seen it at Walmart, so that means
Right.
something.
And that's the big thing. As long as you can get the ammo, 6 millimeter is a good round, and you can get good factory ammo for it, but it's probably not going to be from Walmart.
Yeah. And when it comes to factory ammo, what I consistently think of is, can I get it on the internet? Honestly, I can find ammo on the internet and use AmmoSeek or any one of those other ammo type places and figure out where it is. And I don't pay sales tax, but then what I do have to pay is shipping and the hazmat. So usually I can find it cheap enough online and order it. So I don't really consider that too much of a deal unless you're the kind of guy that wants to be able to walk into a store and buy it. Otherwise, I think you can find 6.5 Creedmoor and 308, but 6 Creedmoor is going to be the one that's harder to find.
Right. But that said, even as long as you have a fairly decent gun shop in town, they're probably going to have 6 Creedmoor also.
Yeah, and certainly if you go in and talk to them and say, "Hey, I need some 6 Creedmoor," they can order it in and have it in a couple weeks.
Oh, absolutely. Probably less than that from most places. I don't think there's really any issue getting 6 Creedmoor anywhere.
No, no. And in fact, I went in and said, "Hey, I need some 25-20 ammo." Right? It's for my grandpa's old lever action, and I think there's one place that makes it, and my gun store ordered it in. I had it in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I think just we're making one big order, but otherwise, yeah, you can find the ammo moving forward. So at that point, I think it becomes more about the ballistics and about the distances you're going to be shooting and what exactly you want to do with it. And any one of the 3 cartridges are going to be able to shoot long range. The 308 won't stretch out as far. Sometimes it can be limited by the transonic. And I don't shoot 308. And Randy, have you shot 308 much?
I've shot it, but not a lot. I've got a lot more experience with 6.5 and 6 millimeter calibers.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. But I've seen that and paid attention to the shooters that are shooting 308. But usually, 800, 900 and that, you start to have issues possibly with going transonic. But if you're a hand loader, you can load bullets to avoid that and speed up the twist and do a lot of different things. So, but today we're just going to be talking about, hey, I want to shoot long range. I want to get a rifle. And do I go 6.5 or 308? And we're tossing in there 6 Creedmoor as well. So, but I think that's good. And so this is for somebody that doesn't hand load and just kind of your typical 24-inch barrel. The numbers here that we've got were pulled from factory Hornady ammo, I believe. So we've got the 308 shooting a 168 grain bullet going 2,700 feet per second. So that's muzzle velocity. And the 6.5, we've got a 140 grain ELDM, and it's going 2,710. And for the 6 millimeter, it's 108 grain ELDM. So those are Hornady bullets on all of these, and it is going 2,960. So right off the bat, it's kind of surprising, but the 6.5 and the 308 are only 10 feet per second apart per what Hornady's saying on their match ammo. And the 6 has them both by 250 feet per second. So how would you describe that, this velocities in relation to case capacity and powder capacity to spit those bullets out at different velocities, Randy?
It's really got to do with the length of the bullet and the pressures you get from the bullet. Just like normally you would someone would tend to think if they don't reload and don't know about the pressures and stuff. If you've got this, for example, 123 grain bullet versus 140 grain 6.5, you would think you would need more powder to push that 140, right? If you didn't reload. However, the fact is that because of the way the pressure spikes and how long it takes to push that bullet out, you're actually going to lower your powder charge to get the faster speed on the 140 grain versus the 120. So it's more of a pressure issue, and that's how they're getting it with the same case capacity.
Yeah. So right off the bat, when we're talking velocities, there's two things that we really look at to judge what a bullet's going to do at distance. And those two things are really the velocity, the muzzle velocity, and then the ballistic coefficient. How slippery is that bullet as it flies through the air? How aerodynamic is it, right? If you throw a softball, right, it's going to slow down a lot more than if you throw like a football, that's spinning, or a football-sized rock, or if you throw a muzzle loader, right, shooting a round ball versus a projectile that's shaped more of a bullet. And so the same velocity on a 308 round with the 168 is going to be right. We're going to it'll slow down faster as it gets out there. Right. What's the BC, the ballistic coefficient? This is a G7 on the 308 is 0.261. So that's a mathematical number that tells us that bullets, the effect that gravity and wind and other environmentals are going to affect that bullet as it slows down, right? So,
and I'm just going to put in there too, for especially our new shooters, don't get too hung up on ballistic coefficient. Just know higher the number, the better it's going to be for you on performance.
Yeah, and the ballistic coefficient is also dependent on velocity, right? So at muzzle velocity, it's going to have a higher ballistic coefficient than it will when it's at 1,300 feet per second and 1,200 feet per second as it's nearing the transonic zone. So the further out it goes, the BC actually drops. So it's a function of Mach, as they say. So they're very interrelated, right? The BC is related to the shape of the bullet and the velocity of the bullet. But what are we looking at? The BC of the 6.5 Creedmoor is 0.322, right? And the BC of the 108 ELDM is 0.268. So out of the bullets, the 168 and the 108 are more closely related as to the ballistic coefficient. So in this situation, the 6.5 Creedmoor, in this match ammo, the bullet has a better ballistic coefficient than the 308. And especially considering that the 6.5 is going faster than the 308, plus it has a higher ballistic coefficient, the amount of drop that it has over long range and the effect of wind on it is going to be substantially less on a 308, on the 6.5 versus the 308. And I'm pulling up, let's see, yeah. So I've got he doesn't have the, I've got the drop chart right here. So at 1,000 yards, the time of flight for a 308 is 1.647. And the time of flight for a 6.5 bullet is 1.503 seconds. So right off the bat, you're talking fractions of a second, but a 308 is flying through the air longer, so it's going to be affected by gravity longer, because gravity is a function of time, and as well it's going to be affected by the wind because it's in the wind longer. So at 1,000 yards, the velocity of the 6.5 is 1,472 feet per second. But at the velocity at 1,000 yards for the 308 is 1228. So you can see leaving the muzzle at approximately the same speed. In fact, the 308 only loses 10 feet per second, but by 1,000 yards, it's got basically 240 feet per second faster over the time.
Right.
And let's see, drop here is going to be 412 inches for the 308, and drop is going to be 362 inches for the 6.5.
Right, and that comes into play pretty big when it comes to your scope adjustment and how much adjustment you actually have in your scope. You're not really going to be worried about adjusting it by the inches, obviously, but you're going to be going off of either MOA or mils, depending on what kind of scope you get. And we'll be talking more about scopes on another episode. What do we have for the 6mm?
Yeah, so the 6mm at 1,000 yards, it's only been in the air 1.455 seconds. So because of its higher velocity starting out at the muzzle, it's in the air less time. So what that means as far as the 6.5 is the velocity reduces the time it's exposed to gravity. And gravity operates at a constant rate, 32 feet per second. No, I can't remember. I don't remember all the math. But for every second in the air, it's going to drop. And so it's dropped less. So its ballistic coefficient is lower, but it drops 328 inches. Okay. So the 6.5 is going to drop 362 inches. So 6.5, even with a better BC, the 6 mm beats it out because it has higher velocity. So it's the combination of velocity and BC that beats it out. So if we look at it and think about it in this way, as far as BC, the 308 and 6.5 are the same, right? They're really closer to being the same than different. But on velocity, the 6.5 and the 308 are about the same. So in this situation, the 308 has the slowest velocity and the lowest BC, and so it's the slowest and drops the most.
What was the velocity of that 6 mm at the 1,000 yards, too?
The velocity was 1438.
Okay, so
yeah, and the velocity of the 6.5 was 1472. So interestingly, the 6.5 Creedmoor holds its velocity more steady. Right,
and that's based off that's because of the BC, where your 6 mm comes in is smaller diameter, is going to be affected slightly less by the wind because it's got less surface to push on it over the 6.5.
Well, and a big part of it is time of flight. The time of flight for the 6 mm is 1.455 seconds. The time of flight for the 6.5 is 1.5 seconds. So
right.
So
yeah, so those two things in combination, less time and less surface area, is what helps with 6 mm, and why that's become such a good competition cartridge, especially because it really handles the wind better than anything else.
Yeah, and so its initial velocity is what really beats it, is what really gives it the boost, right? Because it's just exposed to gravity and wind for a shorter period of time. Yep. So velocity is a key component. So if you really want to juice up a bullet or a cartridge, you can push for velocity. And oftentimes it may depend. You could run, for instance, in the 6.5, you could run a 130 grain bullet, which will have a lower BC, but if you run it faster, then it can outperform to certain distances the 140, because gravity is a time of flight function. It's strictly a time of flight. The longer it flies, or the shorter that it is exposed to gravity, between here and 1,000 yards, then the less it's going to drop. That's a direct function of gravity, is drop. You throw in other things like aerodynamic jump and other bits, but that's minor relative to the effect of gravity. So velocity is king. Velocity, if you can get the velocity and the BC, you're ahead of the game. And so that's why the 308, right, is not going to be as effective, and it's not chosen for the type of long range shooting that we're doing. My understanding, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is engagements in the military were looked at, what are common engagements and common bullets and other things. But engagements in the military for snipers were never really intended at the ranges that we're shooting right now, the long ranges.
Not really. I mean, snipers shoot out typically, I think sniper school goes out to either 1,000 or 1,200 yards, and you can do that with 308. They're not shooting 168s, though. I believe they're shooting 175 grain bullets now. But don't quote me on that. I've never been, so.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure somebody's going to correct us, but it was never intended for really the long distances. But now that's why the snipers in the military, they're talking about a large Magnum in 300, whether it's the 300 PRC or the 300 Norma, or even the 300 Win Mag, but they're going to the larger calibers, and that's like in hunting, where the energy on target is important, because obviously the 308 is going to carry a whole lot more energy even if it's going slower, because the bullet's bigger than a 6.5, than a 6 or a 6.5. So what do you? Both of us shoot a 6.5, or excuse me, both of us shoot a 6XC, which is ballistically almost identical to a 6 Creedmoor. And so, why don't you explain the bullet we're shooting and why we chose the smaller 6 millimeter bullet for long range?
Okay, so for competition purposes, just like Steven was talking about earlier, we've got a faster bullet running a smaller diameter, so it's getting to the target quicker and it's not getting it deflected by the wind. That's why it's good for competition stuff. If I was choosing a hunting rifle for long distance, I probably would go with at least a 6.5. Probably something else. It would really depend on what I was hunting in the range. But really, when you look at it, I know we've kind of talked about the 6 and 6.5 Creedmoors and then the 308, but it really applies no matter what caliber you go with. Any 6 millimeter versus any 6.5 millimeter versus any 30 caliber cartridge, and there are too many to go through each cartridge of which one is best versus the other. And what it really comes down to, let's say a 6XC versus a 6 Creedmoor, for example. If I'm pushing the exact same bullet with the same BC at the same speed, which you can do, neither one of them is ballistically superior in any way. It'll be the exact same thing. So
yeah, there are differences. The differences would be the size of the bullet then is going to impact energy on the target and recoil and things like that. If it's a smaller bullet versus a larger bullet.
Right. And it really just depends. That is one other thing. Recoil. That's another reason the 6 millimeters are pretty popular in the PRS scene. You've got a lot less recoil with those 108 to 115 grain bullets than you do with the 168 to 175 grain bullets, which are typical in a 308. Yeah. And even with a muzzle brake, if you're shooting both of them, there is a very noticeable difference between the two, and it just helps you stay on target better.
Yeah, and so for competition, I initially ran a 6.5, and it was braked, but I noticed a significant difference in going to a 6XC, just being able to stay on target, being able to operate my rifle better. The one bad thing is further out there at distances, at 1,000 yards, 1,200 yards, there's not as much energy. I'm running a 115 DTAC. And so calling impacts that far is much harder. Whereas if somebody's shooting a 168 in a 308, those impacts are going to be visible, or even a 6.5, they'll be more visible than the 6 millimeter. So there's cost benefit analysis in looking and figuring out what your purpose is going to be doing. And we did cover the ballistics, which is primarily what everybody thinks of. And rightly so, but we have the other factors. Somebody might want cheap ammo. Go 308.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'll pay a little wind penalty, but who cares if you shoot more and you have fun? Then choose a 308, right? Run it.
Right. And there really is, when it comes to shooting in competition, there's no wrong bullet. Any bullet you can get out there and shoot with, if that's what you've got, that's the right bullet to shoot. Are there bullets that are going to perform better for certain things? Absolutely. But if all you've got is a 308 or all you've got is a 6.5, get out there and shoot it. That is the biggest key to getting out and getting into long range shooting.
Yeah. So in the data that Casey did, he ran the analysis, assuming someone was shooting, let's see, wind estimation that you could call wind within 3 miles per hour, that you could range it within 1 meter, and the rifle and the shooter could shoot consistently 1 MOA, and the velocity, you got a SD of 20 feet per second, which is typical for a
factory ammo.
Yeah, a factory match ammo is what I would say. And so, but looking at those, he ran them at 500 yards. The 6 millimeter gets a 94.5 hit percentage, right?
Yeah.
The 6.5 gets a 96 hit percentage. And at that point, the 308 is dropping down to 89.8 hit percentage. So now obviously we're just going, Casey was just going with a 1 MOA precision. Now I'm typically with my rifles holding about half MOA. My rifles actually shoot better because I have a buddy that whenever he shoots my gun, it always shoots better than half MOA. But I can't shoot better than half MOA. So if I reduce that down, then, we're still talking about 9 out of 10 hits at 500 yards. Right. And what size was the, do you remember what size target he ran on that?
It was a 1 MOA target, so 10.47 inches.
Yeah, so 1 MOA target. And in PRS, if you can hold 1 MOA, most targets are going to be between 2 and 3 MOA.
Yeah,
right?
or a full size IPSC.
Or full size IPSC. So we're talking a 1 MOA at 500 yards gets 9 out of 10 hits with a 308. 9.5 hits with 6 or 6.5. So 500 yards, there's practically no difference. You're going to be able to hit the target inside 500 yards. And how many targets are really beyond 500 yards at any of the PRS matches you've been to, Randy?
Not a whole lot. I mean, you've got a few, but not many. The majority are 500 and in. Because once you start getting into that positional stuff, trying to hit a 2 MOA target at 1,000 yards isn't happening for very many people at all.
Yeah. We had some prone, shooting out to 1,000, but those are big full-size IPSCs or wider, bigger targets. You're talking 1, 2 MOA. So if you can hold your position with a 308, 500 yards in, there's very little handicap if you're able to call the wind and you have your distances, right? And all of the misses at 500 yards were a difference of wind. I can put that on up there. So that's the 308. So you can see the misses off to the sides of the target. That's just not having the wind within 3 miles per hour. If you're better at calling wind, then it's going to be better. But those hits would be on a 2 MOA target. Here's the 6.5, right? All you have is misses off to the side, and here's the 6. Right. So realistically, very little difference. Once you get out to 1,000 yards, the hit probability on a 1 MOA target, if you're right, is going to be 47.8% for a 308. And these are where the significant differences come. The 6.5 Creedmoor is going to be 62.3%. And the 6 Creedmoor is going to be a 58% hit. So obviously there's a little bit bigger spread at 1,000, but it's practically because of wind. If you look here's the 308, you can see most of those misses.
Only got 1 or 2 that are outside based off of anything besides wind on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why guys that can shoot and call wind can shoot a 308 and kick my butt all day long.
Yep.
All day long. Because it's a wind game for the most part. But again, there's the other things, which is recoil and speed because of time stages and that. But, the 6.5, because of the weight of the bullet, because of the higher BC of the 140 and its speed, it has the highest hit percentage. It's basically 4.2. You're 4.2% more likely to hit a 1 MOA target with a 6 Creedmoor. Now this was a 180 grain or 108 6mm bullet versus a 140 6.5mm bullet. When we get into our 115s, we start to give up a lot less to the 6.
I believe the 115s have a higher BC than the 140s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it. All I know is when I ran the numbers, I didn't feel like I was losing anything to the 6.5 Creedmoor. So, but in summary,
I can look that number up real quick, honestly.
yeah. So, but in summary, as you're looking at and choosing your cartridges, right? And we're just talking about short action cartridges, basically this, close to the same powder capacity. So your 308, right? Your 6.5 Creedmoor, you could toss in like a 7mm 08 is going to be right there in between the 308 and the 6.5 Creedmoor 7mm. There's a lot of good 7mm bullets. I love 7mm for hunting in a Magnum. But the 6.5 Creedmoor, you could talk about the 260, right? If you get a fast twist and the 130, 140 class bullets in a 260, that's going to be essentially the same as a 6.5 Creedmoor. And then you got the 6mm, the 6 Creedmoor. You and I hand load, so we've got the 6XC, but there's the 6x47 Lapua, the 243 or the 243 Ackley Improved. There's just a ton of.
And really, the only disadvantage you typically see on a 243 versus the 6 Creedmoor is going to be your factory barrel twist.
Yeah, it's hard to find a factory barrel designed to spit out these long, high BC bullets. That's the problem.
But if you get,
you're going to be 1 in 9 twist, we're running 1 in.
I'm running a 1 in 7.5.
Yeah, that's what mine is. 1 in 7.5. So.
Yeah, and that's really the only disadvantage and why 243 isn't seen in more competition stuff. Because one, they don't make factory ammo designed for the faster twist, and two, they don't make guns factory with the right twist for the high BC bullets.
Yeah.
But if you hand load and get a rifle custom built, no reason not to go with the 243.
Yeah. Well, there are reasons not to, and I'll just name a couple of them. One is the cartridge is longer, the neck angle tends, as they say, to erode throats faster. And in my 6XC, for the same velocity, for the same bullet, I'm running 6 to 8 grains less powder. So the 6XC is and the 6 Creedmoor are just more efficient cartridges than the 243. But the end, once that bullet, the high BC bullet, spits out at the end of the muzzle, it's 6 to 1.5 dozen the other, which one you choose.
Yeah.
So your point's taken, but if I'm going to build a rifle and that I'm going to hand load for, then I would choose obviously what I did, a 6XC or something else that meets your.
Yeah, and I guess one other disadvantage you'd have with the 243 also is the availability of match grade brass.
Yeah.
Because we can get alpha brass for our 6XCs or 6 Creedmoors, whereas you can't for the 243. You might be able to get Lapua brass. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that goes really deep into the rabbit hole, right? How much are you going to reload? Are you going to do all these things? And certainly we'll be covering a lot of those. But for purposes here, and I've got to wrap this up and run, but for purposes here, what we're talking about is what's the difference and how do I decide between them? And so we've just been talking ballistically, right? What's the difference ballistically? If I just show up with a rifle and start shooting it, what's going to be the difference between a 308, a 6.5 Creedmoor, and a 6 Creedmoor? And so it's a function of, number one, the bullet weight and the bullet shape. The more a bullet weighs to stay within the diameter, the longer it has to get. And so the longer it gets for its weight, it's more aerodynamic. And so high BC bullets are good because they slip through the air. They're not affected by drag to slow down. And so they travel further during the same time period and are affected less by gravity. And also the forces of wind. So you want to get the highest BC bullet that you can practically shoot out of the rifle, if that's one you go. So choose a bullet with a high BC and then match it to the barrel. You had a good point when talking about 243 and the 6XC, is the longer and heavier bullets need to spin faster to remain gyroscopically stable, right? And so I was shooting I had a 14 twist 243 when I first got started. It's a barrel for my coyote gun, for a coyote gun. It's 20 inches long. It's awesome. But it has a 12 twist, and it won't shoot anything over like 55 grains in a 243. So maybe 60 grains. So I'm shooting varmint bullets, but they're screaming out of that. But which is the benefit in some things. But I tried to shoot heavier bullets, and at 25 yards they were keyholed. You could see a perfect shape of the bullet as it went through the paper sideways.
Right, and that's when it comes, and that just gets into the whole marketing and what you're using the gun for. Really, what you're using the gun for is a big one, because for competition, you don't need a 50 or 60 grain bullet going probably 3,500 feet per second.
No.
They're never going to see the impacts at distance on it.
And they won't allow it because they usually have speed limits of about 3,200 feet per second.
PRS is 3,200 feet per second. So
yeah, they like to preserve their targets. But that's getting back to it. Talking BC, you want a high BC bullet. Typically, those are heavy for caliber bullets because they're stretched out longer, so they're more efficient through the air. So it takes less time for them to travel, less affected by gravity, less affected by wind. So you want a high BC bullet. That's to your advantage. The other piece of it is velocity. You want a good velocity. And just in the numbers that we talked about and ran here, you could see that a lower BC bullet in the 6 Creedmoor could keep up with a higher BC bullet in the 6.5 Creedmoor simply because it had 240 feet per second advantage. So, but if you get a 6.5 or a 6 Creedmoor pushing a 115 grain bullet at 2850, which is or a little bit higher, which is kind of a slower speed and a slower node for my 6XC, then I'm beating the 6.5 Creedmoor not only on velocity but also on BC, and so I have that advantage. The only disadvantage is I have lower energy on target, further out there. So it's just harder to see impacts, harder to see misses, depending. But that's the trade-off because I go for lower recoil. So look at those things and consider, do I want a bigger bullet that's going to have a higher BC, and do I have a rifle with a fast enough twist rate, and what am I looking for? Recoil. What else do I want to do with this rifle? I personally would run 115 Burgers in a 6XC for hunting, for hunting deer. And I have a barrel out right now that's getting chambered in 6XC to go hunting. It's a souped up 243 that have killed lots of deer.
Yep.
But if you want to, be able to take elk with it, then, look at this 308. And again, the hit probability at 500 yards.
6.5 is good for elk as well.
Yeah, elk would too. But if you want to bump it up at 500 yards, you're talking hit in a 1 MOA zone 90% of the time. Okay, in 1 MOA, that's 5 inches. You've got 15 inches for an elk kill zone. So you have a 3 MOA target at 500 yards. So again, running the numbers and understanding is going to help you. If you want to shoot and you don't have the range like I do out west, and you can get out to 500, 600, 700, 800 yards, then a 308 may be as much as you want, because you're not going to be at a significant disadvantage.
Right. That's like me in Florida. If I'm out deer hunting or something, most places I'm never going to get a shot over 150, maybe 200 yards if I'm lucky.
Yeah, any one of those guns is going to do that. Yeah.
So.
It's a little bit different than Arizona. I mean, I can see for miles out here. Not that I would take the shot, but sometimes when you stalk in, or you don't have the wind, or you don't have the time, or whatever, if they're bedded, you've got a shot at 300 or 400 yards and you can get rock steady. That's a shot that you can take and make. But I think we covered it. If anybody had any specific questions about 6mm or 6.5 or 308 or anything that we've gone over that you'd like, definitely let us know. We are looking for content, but hopefully this has been informational and help you understand to decide and go from there. Randy, anything else?
No, that's about it. Again, biggest takeaway from this is shoot what you have, but
Yeah,
any of them, and tailor what you're trying to do with the bullet you're going with. If you're never gonna shoot past 500 yards, it really doesn't matter. Get the any of them.
yeah,
If you're gonna shoot farther, once you start getting out past that, especially past 700 yards, that's when stuff starts
yeah.
changing a little bit.
And if you
So,
start getting that, but if I was, if I was a guy and all I had was a 243 and it was a hunting rifle and I had a scope, I would just find the best shooting factory ammo and just go shoot it. Shoot it at 500 yards. I think
yep.
people would be surprised that they can consistently keep it on a pie plate, a 10 or 12-inch circle. How consistently they'd be able to do that. And that's fantastic practice, especially if your bullet isn't necessarily a high BC bullet. You're going to be dealing with the wind, and you're going to be learning the wind with that bullet. That's if you step up and get a different gun, it's going to be practical. But like we say, just get out there and shoot, and don't overcomplicate it. Right? Just find
Yeah.
one that you want to do and go for it. Make it simple. It really isn't that hard.
No, and that brings up a huge point that I see on Facebook groups and forums all the time. People really try and overcomplicate what they're doing.
Yeah.
They think way too much into it, and they do it all from their armchair at home. They don't actually get out and shoot. It's once you start getting out and shooting and seeing what it does versus what you're reading on the internet is what you really need to experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's the key, and we've said it before. If all you've got is a 22, just start shooting at it 100 yards and 200 yards and 300 yards. It's a blast. Few things give me as much joy as seeing a 22 bullet because the sun's behind me at one particular range, and seeing the bullet drop in at 300 yards because the sun's directly behind me and the stars align. It's cool to see a bullet drop in.
It is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've got a video on YouTube that I had recorded of me shooting the 22, and you could catch the glint of the bullet coming in and watch it come in and poke a hole in the paper. It's cool. I just love that.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, Randy. Good night, man. I'm
All right,
tired.
Steve.
Shut this baby down.
All right. Have a good night, and
Yep.
see everybody later.